time. So anyway, thank you everybody for joining the Peering Forum. This is the morning session, so we have a great lineup of speakers for you today. While off the stage, we are going to have a Peering Personal session at the end of each session. So basically, you can download the template there and then send it to me. My email is also inside the template. If you take a picture of the QR code or something, or copy the bit.ly link on the bottom, you should get a copy of that. We will try to have this slide up, or one of these slides up at every break, so you can actually take time to download the template and fill it in and send it over to me. And for the old timers, you know what to do. So if you can get yours in on session 1. I would also encourage the newcomers to this session to sort of take a look at what the old timers did, and then I hope you can present on the second session. So I got a suggestion, and we made a bit of a change to the Peering Personals this year. So right now is going to be one slide about your network, how big it is, how many people, how much traffic. And just to make it fun for everybody, because it sort of gets boring after the third or fourth Peering Personal, if you want to create a slide to give us a bit more detail about your city where you come from, or your country where you come from, things like food, culture, just share a little bit extra about your market. I think that would be interesting for everyone. So let's see how that goes. So these are the 2 more sessions. Tonight there will be a Peering Social at 6:30 to 8:30. It's by invitation only, and then basically everybody here at our Peering Forum is invited. So we want to make it a bit more cozy than a general 600 people social, so that we can actually talk to each other in a much more in a smaller space. So it's going to be held at Crown Metropole. Apparently it's somewhere across the road, so I'm sure we'll have ushers helping you find the way. And it's sponsored by Equinix. So lastly, we will be having our annual Asia Peering Forum. Right now is targeted for Hanoi. Unfortunately, they won't let me in right now to go take a look at the site because I'm from Hong Kong. So. Oh, they reopened Hong Kong, so we can actually go now. Okay, so we'll go and scope out the site a little bit better, get the contract signed, etc. But mark your calendars. So as some of you may know, the brains behind the event, Jonathan, has left to a different company. So we're looking forward to working with him again to actually bring this to you. So again, it's by invitation only. We will be sending out email invites to the past attendees. If you're interested to join this, if you haven't joined this before, please talk to one of your Equinix account managers, and we will review your status. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Tom Paseka from Cloudflare to tell us about peering in the Oceania region. So please give him a warm welcome.
Good morning. As Raf said, my name's Tom Paseka. I work at Cloudflare. I also have several other hats. So I'm on the steering committee of the New Zealand Internet Exchange, as well as on the steering committee of APIX. So I have a lot of knowledge about peering in this region. I myself am Australian. I'm from a town called Canberra, which probably no one has heard of, even the Australians. It's a little thing called the capital of Australia, but no one really lives there. So talking about the region, here is a map of the region. This is Oceania. There's a few major economies here. You have Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, New Caledonia, Micronesia. There's quite a few small countries, very, very few big ones. Australia and New Zealand are really the outstanding ones. And so when you're thinking, where should you peer? The answer is here, Sydney. That's it. That's the place where you should peer. And if you want to get even more precise, you look at Equinix SY1. That solves 100% of your interconnection needs in the region. That's it. Any questions? Oh, I'm just joking. There is way more to it than that. But population is really centered around Sydney. You have a look at the population in the region. Sydney represents around a quarter, or the Greater Sydney region represents a quarter of Australia's population. It's more than New Zealand, New Caledonia combined. It really is the hub of the region. It's where most finance happens. And to be honest, most interconnection really happens there. Australia has a lot of history around IXPs as well. Let's see if this animation works. No. This is supposed to be an animated GIF, but embedding it in a PDF doesn't usually work very well. There's hundreds of IXPs, or maybe not hundreds, but there is a lot of IXPs throughout the region. As this would be scrolling down, if the animation was working, you would see that there are lots with 0 members. So there's actually a lot of defunct IXs as well. Sydney's really, really heavily weighted though. There's 494 registered networks in PeeringDB on IXs in Oceania. 76% of those networks are actually peering in Sydney. So if you have a look at unique ASs by city, Sydney has 397, Melbourne 155, so less than half. You go to Auckland across the pond and it's 116. Brisbane 112, Perth 82, and starts getting really sad then. You go to Wellington 33, Adelaide 28. My hometown has 5 ASNs. Woohoo. We just launched in Christchurch as NZIX. We currently have 5. Actually, I think this is outdated and it's now 8 ASNs connected. But it looks pretty sad. So the IXPs is in the region. So plotting these on a map, it looks a little like this. Up north, you have one IXP in Port Moresby, which was just recently launched. It is a successful IXP. It's starting to grow. If you ask Jonathan Brewer or Chihu, they'll tell you a lot about this IX, and it's an exciting thing to be there. The first IXP just launched in Darwin, Joe's Edge IX. It's great. There's actually something happening there. Perth has 4 IXPs, Adelaide 3, Melbourne 5, Hobart 2. There's a few around Australia, but you start having a look at some other ones. You see Dunedin in New Zealand says there's an IXP there. I'll give you a hint, there isn't. It's just old data in PeeringDB. The IX is dead. Christchurch says 2, but one of those is dead. Palmerston I didn't actually put on the map. It also isn't there. But it still is in PeeringDB. So I mentioned we just launched Christchurch IX. Please, if you're coming to New Zealand, please go to Auckland. Like I said, if you come to Australia, you need to go to Sydney. You need to go to Auckland in New Zealand. But please also come to Christchurch. Edge IX is also popping up all over the place, which is really exciting to see a new IX growing. This is the Fiji IX, which is launched. I don't think I put that on the map. This is a really interesting one because if you look at the website, it seems like there's no way to actually connect to it. But there's been a lot of work for people to get that live. And Papua New Guinea that I mentioned briefly as well. This image was stolen from the APRICOT blog. And you can see the bottom trace route showing things tromboning through Sydney. Remember that hint that you should go to Sydney because that's where all interconnection happens? That's a great example of it. But after they turned up the IX, they actually started having peering happening in country. One thing across the region which is really, really missing is PeeringDB usage. I know for a fact there's more than 400 networks in the region that are actually peering, so they're not all on PeeringDB. This really needs to be fixed. A network like mine, me being excluded, when we look at a country, we look at PeeringDB. If we don't know who is there, we don't know how to get there. We don't know where you are, and that's really important if you want us to come to meet you and peer with you. One other thing I don't think I put here is route server usage is incredibly important in Australia and New Zealand. In the US, most people look at a route server and say, I'm never using that, that's horrible, I lose control over my routes. But in this region, someone will say, hey, we're already peering, why aren't your routes on the route server? I'm like, well, we're not peering, I don't have a bilateral session with you. And they'll say, oh, but I thought peering was just the route server. And so you'll actually find that you miss a huge number of routes, a huge number of participants if you're not on the route server and announcing your routes there. Talking about networks in the region, any Australian you talk to when you're talking about networks will tell you about the Gang of Four. When I do a Google search of the Gang of Four, you see this Gang of Four, which maybe Raf will laugh at. It's pretty bad taste. This is in the communist era in China. There was the Gang of Four, and they eventually got kicked out. This is the Gang of Four that people talk about, though. Telstra, Optus, Verizon, and AAPT. There was nearly regulated peering between them. The ACCC, the Australian Consumer Competition something Commission, there you go, has threatened many times, but hasn't actually shown its teeth. And the Gang of Four is actually mostly irrelevant now. So you have a look at the AS, the members in that Gang of Four. AAPT is now owned by TPG. It's no longer a major player for transit traffic, nor eyeball traffic, but TPG itself is. And TPG and Vodafone actually just had their merger approval, which also pushes up their eyeball usage. Then you have Verizon. Verizon hasn't really been relevant since the Aussie Mail sale in terms of an Australian network. AS703 is really, really, really tiny. You have a look at their peering policy, which they have published online, and I highlighted at the bottom. They only require 30 megabits of traffic to meet their peering requirements. So by that measure, this conference room can meet their peering requirements. That doesn't sound like equal peering with other major ISPs. Historically, though, only Verizon has actually had a published peering policy. Telstra, Optus, and the others never actually had anything. Their answer would just be no, if they even answered you. But now they actually have published ones. So if you click on any of these links available on the slides, it'll take you to their published peering policies. The peering policies were really quickly brought in to avoid regulation. The ACCC started investigating the interconnection between these ISPs. And the ISPs got really worried, and so they came up with peering policies that no one would meet to be able to block other participants. It's a very common play. This is the same in the US and everywhere else in the world, but they did this so that they have a clear, easy way to avoid the regulation. There's a number of articles around it. And again, this is the ACCC showing they have actually no teeth in competition. When you go across the pond to New Zealand, Spark, which is Telecom New Zealand, is the incumbent network. They are the largest network. They represent, I think, more than half the eyeballs in New Zealand. And they generally don't peer. It's very, very true of pretty much any incumbent in the world, is that they don't peer in their home market. Vodafone and Vocus are some other major markets over there as well. And they all have generous interconnection policies, including Spark when you consider Sydney. So again, going back to my original point, Sydney is the place that you should peer. The others will sometimes peer, so Vodafone is actually on peering exchanges in New Zealand. Spark, however, generally isn't. You can reach them on Equinix's route servers in Sydney, though. So again, another point, route servers are really important. Having a look at the networks across the region, and I'm sorry for this image mash. This is taken from bgp.achie.net. And on the page, you'll actually see the number of IPv4 prefixes any network is announcing. So in the top left, you have Telstra. They're originating the second chart. So this one, they're originating 420 IPv4 prefixes, but across their peers, they're actually sending around 50,000 prefixes. So that means that they're transiting a lot of networks. You look at another major network, which is AAPT. They're transiting around 10,000 prefixes, but they're originating 500. So the amount that they're transiting is much, much, much smaller than Telstra. Similarly, you go across to TPG, the third one there, to Vocus, to Optus, and to Spark, and you can see that they're significantly smaller. Going back to the competition thing, this is showing just how much bigger Telstra is than the other networks, including in a transit sense. Excuse me. So in conclusion, Australia and New Zealand have been well developed for a long time in peering, but more development needs to happen. There still needs to be more growth in networks growing outside of Sydney. To actually have diverse internet and well-functioning internet, it needs to be in multiple places. We've seen good success in Melbourne growth. We've seen good success in Brisbane growth. Historically, there's been good success in Perth, although that hasn't been growing much lately. New Zealand has been really growing well, but it all needs to get better. We actually need to interconnect more and more. Be expected to use the route servers. I say this again. Many networks here will not set up a bilat with you. You have to use the route servers to reach them. And most importantly, no peering and no internet. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions? If not, please give Tom a hand.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Achie Atienza from Globe Telecom to give us an overview on the Philippines peering landscape. So please give him a hand.
Morning, Achie Atienza from Philippines. First, just a background like Tom, I wear different hats too. Primarily Globe Telecom, I have two functions, a product manager and I handle also the infrastructure part. And at the same time, outside it, part of Internet Society Philippines and also the Network Operators Group. Okay, disclaimer. The stuff that I'm going to share today is based on personal perspective, and it was not influenced by anybody to make them look good or look bad. Okay, first. Agenda is infrastructure, and then the players in the Philippines, and then bidding perspectives that are unique to the Philippines. In numbers, we actually have quite a few cables landing in the Philippines. So basically, the map shows we have 3 major islands. So basically, it's an archipelago. We have like 7,100 islands on high tide, but when it's low tide, we have more. So maybe a couple of 20+ islands comes up. Okay. And then it's divided into 3 major island groups. The one on the northern part is Luzon, and then Visayas, and then Mindanao. So we have 10 submarine cables coming in. We have 8 cable landing stations, around 549 ASNs, and 9 local IXPs. So bringing more context to that one, if you notice on the topmost part, that is where you see the the density of the cable landing stations and the subsea infrastructure going Philippines. So that became a problem to us when we realized that if something happens on the northern part of the Philippines, we will be totally disconnected. So eventually, it was, we came up with the idea to have a cable landing system on the southern part, but it took us a while to do it because the southern part is, has more of a militia kind of ecosystem there, so you really have to negotiate in a different way to get the stuff up. But eventually, we were able to pull it off, and the CUS cable is already up. And in terms of IXPs, so because of the density of the infrastructure, so if you notice, most of the IX are also on the northern part. So it's 7+2 because the +2 IXPs just came in like last year. And then we are working on bringing further regionalization to the country. We have 3 in Visayas, and then working on 1 in the Mindanao. So if the other guys, I've shown this slide before, so I hope Arnold would not ask me why is it still not up. So it's still a work in progress. So there are some challenges in bringing this up. In terms of players, we counted the number of ASNs. So this is around 549. So the breakdowns, you have 2 byte and 4 byte ASNs. And if on the next slide, I'll show it's kind of unique that it's not only ISPs who gets the chunk of the AS numbers. So the breakdown here, we also have like data centers, we have the mobile operators, and one thing unique is actually academe also has there, like schools, so they maintain their own infrastructure, and we have enterprises, we have government, and they consider themselves as a small network that manage their own infrastructure. There's a government mandate that was announced that all infrastructure of government will be home on a single government entity. And that's where they connect all ISPs, all infrastructure related to internet. And in terms of the breakdown, so we also have, besides the telco and the traditional ISPs, we have cable TV providers because we have a lot of islands. So each island may have their own provider. Initially, they provide cable television, and then eventually they give internet. And then we also have enterprise, and then academe, and then government. And the last one, which is POP Telco, this is our small businesses like family-owned infrastructure. Maybe they won a lottery or they're really rich and then they started their own infrastructure. So the idea is actually to get those guys together so you don't need to build your own infra. So the key is community or sharing or something bilateral that needs to be set up. And perspectives. So we all know that peering is economical, it's good, but from our end, when it started, it wasn't that way. So when we introduced the peering concept, a lot of people didn't have their own AS number, IP address. And for them, that is cost. So if they don't benefit from that, they will not push through it. You can't peer without those two. And then eventually, we were able to convince them, so they got their own IP, they got their own ASNs, but they need to upgrade their router. And they need to hire someone to manage that. And then that, again, is another challenge for them. So they were able to go through that hurdle. Next thing is actually to connect. Cross-connect costs in Philippines is a bit expensive. And they have this idea that it's supposed to be free. Well, unfortunately, these are recurring costs for other providers. That's why it couldn't be waived. But again, those three stuff made the imbalance in terms of economics. So we're still working on to sort this one and actually more or less provide other carriers or other networks to interconnect in a bilateral kind of way. Sociology. Peering is sociology. So connecting it to the previous slides, if actually nobody started it or nobody leads it, nobody will do it. So it's very hard for us. Everybody knows it's good, but nobody's doing anything. So somebody needs to start. I'm not saying that we started it, but part of the community activities we're trying to do is to teach fellows on how this is improving or giving a lot of help in the community, and that's why most of them are starting to get the hang of it and eventually do the peering. And this one. Peering is physics. Okay, this is my favorite part. So, something that is stable like this chair, and you push it, it will not move. But if you put a very strong amount of force, you more or less get to move it. So, for a very long time, we have been stuck with the peering concept just on a literal perspective. But eventually, we had a lot of guys, a lot of help, especially the big guys in the ISP community in Manila. Then eventually, we got people interconnected, and then we got them moving. So we're past beyond the slip point, and hopefully, we move forward and not backward. And then peering is geometry. So we did everything. So this is more or less the culmination. One of the ISPs and one of the challenges we had was, okay, this ISP, okay, we're connected, we are peered. They just physically connected to the port, and that's it. So you need to do your configuration. You need to do your policy. You need to actually exchange traffic. So we try to, give them, this is a lot of stuff you need to do and not just physically connect. It doesn't stop from there. And this presentation actually helped them. And lastly, peering is also perspective. So it depends on how you view it. Before, peering was just a buzzword. It's like a savior to improve the internet in the Philippines, but they don't know what to do. So part of what we try to do, we organize a community setup which was led by the Network Operators Group. So when we revived the NOG, So we had people coming in, those engineers who know peering but doesn't know how to do with it, and eventually they got interconnected, they interacted, and eventually they knew how to do it. So based on that, from peering from 0 networks, we more or less have half of the networks in Philippines peering, and most of them are in the Luzon area, the major island, and the next step is actually to put them all together like the whole country. Thank you. Questions?
Any questions from the floor? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So far, I've received 2 peering personals, one from Hurricane Electric, one from Aussie Broadband. If anyone wants to send me their peering personals, I would love to receive them. So anyway, next up we have Julio from NIC.br. So please give him a warm welcome. And he can tell us about the peering opportunities in Brazil. Thank you.
Hi. I made this presentation on Monday, and the idea was to give information about the peering environment in Brazil. Okay. So after the presentation, I received several questions from the audience requesting me more information about why we have a lot of participants in our IXs, and even the amount of traffic we have. So I try to explain more to you today the environment of internet in Brazil. Okay, let's see that if I can be more clear. Okay, so I will try to give to you a few numbers, okay, so we can create a scenario, okay. So Brazil have 210 million people working there in 5,570 municipalities. This number is important because it's where are the clients, okay, the eyeballs, who will use internet in Brazil. The penetration of internet in Brazil, I believe it's not very big, okay, it's around 50 to 60% of the population, okay, so we have 127 million internet users. So we have a lot of space to grow yet. In this picture, you can see the demographic density of people in Brazil. This is not, I think maybe it's not the right presentation. Let me see. No. Yeah, this is not the right presentation. I don't know if I uploaded the wrong one. So when they'll change the presentation, but let me see. I will go to this picture in the other presentation, where we can see how is the internet service provider market in Brazil. Okay, so we have a few big telecom companies. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 that are big. Okay, and they the objective for them in terms of providing internet service to the clients, it's mostly based on wireless services, okay? Especially cellular phones. And we have a part of this market that occupied by small ISPs that do not work with wireless, but they are working with fiber optics. So here we have a market where these ISPs I'm telling represents about 1/4, 25%, okay? All other 75% of Brazilian market represented by these telecom companies, they normally do not appear in our i-axis, okay? They have presence in the i-axis, but the idea of them is sometimes get specific content that's available in the IX, or to make some internet quality tests that we have in our infrastructure. So we started with 100%, and I am taking 25% of the market. So let's go back. This is show our aggregated traffic. Nowadays, we have about 9.5 terabits of traffic in all our i-axis. But what's important in this slide is the number of autonomous systems we have in Brazil. Okay, we have about 7,100, and this is the number of autonomous systems directly connected to our internet exchanges. When I say directly connected, is the router of the autonomous system is connected to our IP fabric. So we have total about 3,500 connections, and in this amount of connections, about 2,500 unique ASNs connected. Remember that Brazil have about 7,500, so probably 1/3 of these ASNs are directly connected in our i-axis. So we have the small and medium ISPs, okay, that represents 25% of internet service providing in Brazil. They can get almost 60 to 70% of the content they have to deliver to their clients connecting to IXBR in São Paulo, for example, okay? And the number of this company is hard to define to you, okay? It's not very specific. There are some tax benefits or how they can operate in Brazil to have a better, pay less taxes, okay? And we believe that we have between 6,000 and 10,000 companies working as internet service providers in Brazil. So what we have connected directly to our i-axis is about 2,500. So it's a part of all this internet service provider market. The other part of this internet environment are companies that they offer transport between IXs or regions in Brazil to connect remote networks to São Paulo or Rio de Janeiro. So these companies do not do just this kind of service. They also sell transit to internet service providers. And it's important to understand that these companies, they get content from NIC.br also. So they get local content from the IXs and put this in the IP service they are offering to internet service providers around Brazil. And sometimes we receive announcements from these not directly connected in our routing table in São Paulo, where if we analyze, we will see about 75% of Brazilian networks are announced in São Paulo. So we started with 100%, 25%, and about 1/3 or more than of the market of internet service providers. So NIC.br, I believe, represent between 10 to 15% of Brazilian internet traffic. So we have, we are a small part, or we play a small role in this whole environment. Internet nowadays, we have internet service providers that want content to distribute to their participants. So they look for places where this content is available. So we have cities like São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, where there's a big offer of content. I show you numbers on an infrastructure of our three most important internet exchanges. Okay, we have São Paulo. We have about 7 terabits of traffic, and in terms of infrastructure, we have two central points of interconnections, 2 data centers that are owned by NIC.br. And connected to these 2 central points, we have 30 data centers, where who wants to connect to NIC.br can look a place to host their equipment and request a connection to our IXs. Okay. It's also possible to connect to the central data centers, but it's more easy to connect to all these distributed data centers. This is a picture that shows where come the autonomous systems that connect in São Paulo. Okay? In São Paulo, we have connection coming from all the states in Brazil, and also for foreign countries. About maybe 40 to 50 networks from Latin America. The second most important is Rio de Janeiro, about 1.5 terabits per second, and about 12 to 13 data centers that you can connect. Also a map indicating where are the ASNs connecting to Rio coming from. We can see that it's not so spread like São Paulo. And finally, Fortaleza. It's in the northeast region of Brazil, and we have 8 data centers available. Fortaleza is growing very fast. We have an investment there to try to convince the content providers to go there and put their content. So we can see a step here that when Netflix arrived in Fortaleza, and recently Facebook is available there. So we can see that most connections that come to Fortaleza are from the northeast of Brazil. Why these three IXs are so important? We can also see the cable submarine scenario in Brazil. We see that the most important landing point in Brazil is Fortaleza, and also Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. So it's a natural situation for content to be in these cities. Okay, so what I tried to inform to you with this part of the presentation is that we have a lot of internet service providers, a lot of autonomous systems. Sometimes service providers operate without autonomous systems. And we have a huge demand of connections and interest to get content from our IXs. This activity of the internet service providers, it's like to become an Uber driver in Brazil. Okay, if they don't have a job, or they don't know what to do. Oh, I can be a driver, or okay, I can also be an internet service provider. So there are many people that are starting business and going to this direction. So now I show quickly a few information about how do we work, mostly in terms of how technically is the connection to our IX. If a content provider want to connect in Brazil, it's what you face. Sometimes we receive complaints about our process of connection because we do something that it's not so usual. I received some complaints. I try to improve our process. And the most specific or different features that we have is that our multilateral peering agreement, we have two separate VLANs for v4 and IPv6. This is because in the beginning we had problems with some IPv6 stacking in a few network equipment, and we decided to split. And from that time, we didn't change it. We also have a bilateral peering agreement that can be done using private VLANs or even using the multilateral VLAN. We have shared port or reseller port. It's a very important kind of connection where you can transport more than one autonomous system to the IX. Normally, companies that do remote peering use this kind of connection. The use of them in São Paulo is responsible for about 1,000 connections that we have there. Remember that we have several companies that sell transport to all around Brazil to São Paulo. And when they reach São Paulo, they are using this kind of ports. The rest is a list of some traditional features of IX. I don't want to to enter in detail right now. Just tell that in São Paulo, we are doing validations in our route servers. We're using RPKI, and also the database of registro.br. So for Brazilian companies that have autonomous system registers in Brazil and also have received IP blocks in Brazil, we do a validation using this database. And it's being, we were marking the announcements with communities since last year, and this week we are activating the filters. So if we encounter an invalid announcement, invalid validation using this database, we are filtering the announcement. And also in São Paulo, we are moving our net mask from a /21 to a /20. We have more than 2,000 routers connected in the network, and we must increase the net mask. I'm showing a final report of our quarantine process. Every connection must pass through this step. This is done by the participant itself. It's an automatic process. And so you can show what we look for. We need connection. We using IPv4 and IPv6. You must make announcements to the route server, even if you don't want to participate to the multilateral peering agreement. But during the quarantine, you have to do it. When you go to production, you can remove your announcements if you want. We make tests to see how many MAC addresses all the connection can learn, due to the size of our infrastructures. We encourage all networks to make announcements to our looking glass, IPv4 and IPv6, and do a few security tests to check if the router connected have some open ports that can be used to amplification attacks. So, just to tell quickly about the model that we operate, as you see, we have big infrastructures, we have several data centers involved, and we have agreement with these data centers. Okay, they give us space, power, and energy, and we put our equipments there. And also they supply to us dark fibers to interconnect to our central points. And the counterpart is that they can sell cross connects to reach our equipment. We now are charging monthly recurring fee only in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, when we charge our operational cost in these locations. Okay, this is the prices that we have, and other locations we will start charging when the traffic goes above 1 terabits per second. And finally, I want to explain quickly how does our operation is, how it's funded. Okay, in Brazil we have Internet Steering Committee, okay, formed by 21 persons that define the path that the internet development must be defined in Brazil. In this committee, we have 9 persons that are indicated by the government from several ministries, and the other part of the committee are from the civil society. It started working in 1995, and they are, the number of members was increased in 2003. And when this committee started to work, they saw that they must have an executive arm to make the decisions they were taking. So they created NIC.br, and the first assignment for NIC.br was to deal with the .br domain registry. And we have about 4 million domains in Brazil, and with the money we get with the annual fee to maintain the DNS server, we have money to reinvest in several projects in Brazil. One of these projects is IX.br. So it's important to understand that all the infrastructure we create and we use are funded by the .br domain registry. Okay, this is what I wanted to try to explain to you, if how is the internet service provider in Brazil. I'm here this week. This will have my contact. If you have any technical doubts about how we work, okay, we are very open to discuss, to exchange information. And if you have questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions on the floor?
Hi, Walt from Hurricane Electric. We very much enjoy being on your internet exchange. One thing I could use help with, is there a possibility to engage you or some of your staff for introductions to different operators that is on your exchange?
Excuse me, I didn't understand.
I'm in need of introductions to different ASNs that are on your exchange. Is that something that you might be able to provide?
I didn't understand. You said about ASNs? I'm not listening.
Well, let me put this another way. Do you organize things like user meetings where, introductions? So like email, if you want to connect to a network, you want to know who to talk to.
Okay. If you enter in our portal, for example, you have a contact information of all ASNs that participates in each location you have presence. Maybe you have never used this function. You have a mail address and contact to all the ASNs.
If that is not successful, would you help me with introduction? If possible. If not, it's okay.
I have to check. Depending on the message you want to send to all the participants, we can help. Normally, if it's technical, it's okay. If commercial, I'm not sure. Technical, it's okay. We have done to other CDNs or content providers.
Thank you for the interesting presentation. And I have a question about the Brazil situation about the ISPs. Then, my question is, number of ISP is quite large in Brazil. So, ISP business in Brazil is easier or not? Yeah, it seems to look easier in Brazil to do the ISP business, because comparing to Japan, we have an ISPs which has an AS number approximately a few hundred. And also the cable TV company provided internet services, which also are a few hundreds. So totally maybe 500 or so for the ISP business. But then you were saying in Brazil that 1,000 or more ISPs are doing the business. So that is my question. So it is very difficult to answer,
Yeah.
but then yeah, seems to be that easy to do the ISP business in Brazil.
Remember that I told that we have a picture of the internet service provider in Brazil. 75% of the market are from big telecom companies. These big telecom companies, they only want to act or work where they can get money easily. So they go to the big cities where the money per person is high, something like that. So Brazil is a huge country. Okay. And there is a lot of space that we don't have internet access, and we have opportunities in cities with 10, 20, or 30,000 people that live in the cities. This is not economically interesting for the big companies, but for the internet service providers, they can get 4,000 clients easily, because there's no one is offering internet service. So we have a lot of companies that are doing this activity, because of the country is very big.
Yeah, yeah. So the traffic, the peak traffic and the IX.br is very huge, I think. And I don't think the big guys do not peer at an IX.br. My understanding is correct?
The big?
Yeah, big ISPs or big telecos.
No, they
No
don't.
peers.
They don't peer
Yeah,
with
so
us. They peer between them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They
yeah.
peer directly, and they peer
Yeah.
directly to all CDNs. They have caches, and they have all infrastructure inside their networks.
Yeah, yeah. So the rest of the ISPs having a huge traffic. That is very amazing for me. So thank you very much. So later, we'll like to share the situation in Japan and Brazil, and I would like to compare the situations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, please give Julio a big... Oh, one more question.
One more question, actually. I believe I'm just continue the other question. I believe that this statistic is include also the sales of IP transit over IXBR, because IXBR, in difference with many other internet exchanges, they allow one member to another member to sell internet IP traffic
Yes.
from one to another member. So that's why the traffic in compare with Japan, etc., is way higher. Is it correct assumption?
Yes, as we say, you can establish a bilateral connection with specific ASNs using a bilateral VLAN or even the multilateral peering agreement, and we only check the kind of ether type that you are sending in our infrastructure, okay? But it's common that we have telecom companies that sell transit inside the IX using private VLANs. And in our statistics, we get all the traffic that pass to each port.
So including this...
It's all included.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Then please give Julio a big hand.
Thank you.
And I would like to invite our next presenter on stage, Terry Swisner, who's going to tell us a different perspective about peering in Australia.
Okay, quick hands up. Anyone having wireless problems? Yeah. No, be honest, we love feedback. We registered 1,104 devices on the wireless network in the last half hour, and we've been seeing some people saying it's a bit of a problem. Okay, so we'll keep working on it, but thank you for your forbearance there. So as you can see, I'm General Manager of IX Australia. I was appointed in that role in May last year. So as far as IXP land is concerned, you could say I'm a newbie compared to a few people in the room. I'm definitely a babe in the woods. I have been in the industry now since 1987. Had the privilege of being at QUT on faculty there when they turned ARNet on. So, like many of you, been there, done that, and watched a few things happen in the internet industry. So when I gave this talk the other day at APICS, I got very loquacious about things in Australia that can bite you and eat you. So my apologies for scaring the audience that time. I actually quite into describing a few different creatures, and my audience were just getting more pale, and so my apologies to the APICS crew the other day. Okay, there are only 2 or 3 things in Australia that will actually eat you. They're normally sharks or crocodiles. There are 2 different types of crocodiles. There's freshies and salties. Salties will find you in the sea. Freshies will find you in the river. And sharks tend to hunt and so on in warm water. So in northern Queensland, where I come from, we have the sharks, we have the crocodiles, and we have something called a box jellyfish. Now I was telling the guys, the box jellyfish is very entertaining. If you go to the beach with a bottle of vinegar, it will save your life. Because if you get stung by a box jellyfish, you pour the vinegar on, the vinegar's an acid, it will actually neutralise the venom. However, the bad news, don't worry about calling the ambulance, don't worry about racing to the hospital. It takes about 30 minutes for that venom to kill you. Sorry. It's one of the worst ones here. Apart from that, don't worry about the spiders, just stay away from them. They're not going to jump. By the way, it's a complete myth that spiders jump. They run fast instead. Okay, so some market conditions about Australia. Australia is an extremely small telco market by any international standards. Essentially, it's dominated by, first of all, mobiles. It's always more than half the market is about mobiles, and that is always in the hands of Telstra, Optus, and of course Vodafone. TPG did make a play on this last year. They found out they couldn't deploy Huawei, and they also found out it was going to be very expensive and possibly a useless exercise to actually create a 4th mobile network. However, they have actually solved their problem recently by getting their merger with Vodafone approved, which now means we now have 3 very large operators in the Australian market who do just about everything. The other point about our friends here in telco land is their customer bases, 2/3 is normally to do with households, so the residential market in Australia is always 2 out of 3 customers for all of our big telcos here. 42 billion is the figure that I've pulled from IBIS World for the 2018 figures. It's, when we talk about a US market or a European market, that's like what they make out of Luxembourg or something, whereas Australia, that's the entire market value. Being a person who loves feedback and invites people to do surveys constantly and all that, I actually went to our membership and a few outside parties last year and asked them a few questions about what they're doing with their peering, what they're doing with other things in their networks. And we got some really interesting results back, and the APICS guys actually were quite impressed that we actually came to the same conclusions everyone else came to, but fair enough. There were some surprises. Of course, 29 responses out of several hundred members means that we have a 80% confidence limit on our analysis, but fair enough. So as far as the actual operators are concerned, in Australia we've always had something called Pipe IX, who was Pipe Networks, Steve Baxter and Bevan Slattery, who are quite famous here for starting companies. Since then, TPG came along and M&A'd them, and unfortunately our survey data clearly indicates that Pipe IX is at the end of its life cycle. It's running down. But also, Joe has obviously started Edge IX in the last 12 months with friends from Nextop, and that is going phenomenally well. And of course, Interesting enough, Megaport polled ahead of Equinix in our survey as well, which I found interesting. I would have thought that Equinix might have been head and head, but essentially market share in Australia is proportional to coverage. So if you are in 30 or 40 data centres like IX Australia, you're probably going to get a bigger market share. I think to keep this non-partisan, when I was not in the IXP game, if someone asked me, what should I do about peering? I say you should do it often and in many places. So if you are coming to Australia, then I say you will contact me, you will contact Equinix, you'll contact Megaport, and you will contact Joe, and you'll get peering everywhere you can. So basic data. I gave this bottom box is essentially there is a hole in the peering market in Australia because it means our incumbent and our number 2 and our number 3 don't like peering with the rest of us. So it means that when you do come to Australia, if you want Telstra, if you want Optus, you may actually have to buy transit from them in order to get there. Or you could peer with them somewhere else in the world because the minute they leave Australian shores, they're really enthusiastic about peering. Now, Tom went over this in some detail, our gang of 4. I suppose my punchline here is that when it comes to letting the ACCC do anything in telco in Australia, it's networks designed by lawyers and run by economists. So that gives you a fair idea of what we end up with after the ACCC has got involved with anything to do with telco regulation. But a decade ago, the Gang of 4 really mattered. They were a cartel. They made it hard to do peering in Australia. As of today, they're almost completely irrelevant. If you're running a B2C ISP in Australia, you simply go to several of the exchange points, you peer with Netflix, Google, Akamai and so on, and 85% of your traffic will come down through the peering point because it's all the eyeballs looking at content. And that actually now is starting to apply to B2B, to anyone who's running a business ISP, Microsoft Cloud, Google Suite, SAP, anyone who's peering in Australia who actually has content on IXP. As a business person, you should start looking at it. Anecdotally, we are getting interest not just from business-based ISPs and ISPs who only sell to business. We're also getting big businesses start to talk to us about how they can peer, how they can acquire their own ASN and IP address space and come to the peering point and stop paying for transit to big clouds. Oh, and a big plug there for Craig from Nokia. It's worth contacting Craig now and then and finding out what he's doing with their report. Nokia do a lot of work in this area and they publish a lot of really good data. So this is an interesting part of the survey. Question 11 was the what don't you care about, what is critical, what matters. And interesting enough, no one wants to go to ISP to buy, or IXP to buy storage and compute. It makes sense. Why do that? You can just get a P&I or you get a private interconnect. Makes sense. Traditionally, IXP is about two things, lots of connectivity and extremely low latency. And of course, cost. Now, what we're seeing here is that everyone wants to save on their transit bills. So the most critical part of anything to do with peering is don't spend money on transit. Then there's better latency and of course, cheapest possible access to your peers. That makes sense. But of course, 10 years ago, that probably would have applied in exactly the same proportion. Now also, scoring very highly, now getting 47% critical, is access to content. So this means that peering points are not just about exchanging traffic between network users, it's about exchanging traffic between bulk suppliers of network content and bulk users of network content. So it's a slightly different market, and therefore, peering points have now become what I call the fish in the barrel scenario for content providers. They're going to come along and connect once to a large IXP and use that to get to hundreds of ASNs. We also ask people, where would you like us to go next? Anyone here who likes statistics, you'll know that this is almost completely meaningless. It's like saying, well, I'm not in New South Wales, so I'll go to New South Wales next. If I'm not in Victoria, I'll go to wherever next. So everyone who wants to peer somewhere else wants to peer somewhere else. It's here. So it's good. It means that there is an appetite to not just peer in Sydney. In fact, everyone wants to peer everywhere, which is great. This is a typical NPS type question. You always put them in surveys. So our respondents decided that we deserved a 4.3 out of 5, which is great. It means that Australian peering is getting something right. So that's good news for us. Where to peer? Tom very facetiously told us all to peer in SY1. That's fine. You can peer in SY1, SY2, SY3, SY4, SY5 soon. And of course, there's also ME1, and ME2 is almost ready to roll, and so on. So yeah, yes, Equinix is a good place to go to peer. You get a lot of spread. You'll get their exchange, you'll get IX Australia, Joe's there, and there's other, obviously P&I opportunities as well. I'd say if you're going to do the who's who, the next place you talk to is NIC.br. These guys are essentially going to places where Equinix isn't, or Equinix doesn't have the same footprint. One good example is Perth. Our biggest POP for 100 gig in Perth is in P1 in Malaga. So good place to be. The next time you're in Perth, you'll see there's a very large building being constructed at one end of the CBD. That's a 7-level data centre being constructed by NIC.br. That will become P2 this year. So yeah, very worth your while having a chat with the guys at NIC.br when you're locating in Australia. Global Switch, of course, is at 400 Harris Street, which is a very short hop up the road on dark fibre from the Equinix campus at Mascot, so also a good choice. But if you want to do your homework properly, there are obviously 2 very good databases online where you can do this. CloudScene is one. CloudScene's a construct by our friend Bevan Slattery. He likes disseminating information. He uses it as a marketing tool. And you'll find it rather interesting because every location in Australia is also a Telstra location in CloudScene, because Telstra's a major sponsor of CloudScene, so keep that in mind. And of course, our other favourite, PeeringDB. So PeeringDB is the best place to go for information right now, and I'll bring up another slide shortly. As far as getting to Australia is concerned, we have a lot of subsea cable comes in at Sydney and also now in Perth. I had the privilege of doing the silly thing where we pulled the cable ashore in the Sunshine Coast recently for RTI. That was fun. And of course, again, Bevan is out there again with another project where he wants to go from Perth to Oman. So there's actually quite a lot of capacity in the pipeline right now. And given that people are building, they've probably got plenty of commitments and so on, but I think anecdotally, right now we're looking at 100 terabits per second coming into Australia on a subsea cable, and that will suddenly jump over the next 18 months to 400 terabits per second. So everyone's getting pretty serious about connecting to Australia again. That has a very definite cycle. It's like every decade someone builds brand new subsea cable and just ups the ante, which is good. I think the last big game changer for us was Southern Cross in the early noughties. Again, plug for submarine cable map. That's fascinating. It's one of those things where you can just sit there for hours running around the globe looking at stuff, so yeah. PeeringDB. So obviously IX Australia is a gold sponsor of PeeringDB. Another plug, it's now annual renewal time for PeeringDB. If you are a sponsor, please renew, and if you're not a sponsor, please come have a chat to Arnold about sponsoring. It's good to get those resources in. There's lots of work to do and lots of things you can get done with PeeringDB. Thank you there. So why PeeringDB? Well, this is the big question. When it comes to market research out there, someone's already done your homework. It's really easy. Go there, do a search, look it up. One thing I will plug, our data gets published to PeeringDB using an export. It's a public piece of file, which you can actually download yourself if you can guess where the URL is. It uses a standard schema, which is also published on GitHub, so that's open sourced. So once you find out where some of these URLs are, you can actually start importing the data yourself and doing some of your own homework as well. But it's all there in PeeringDB. I think at 1-ish o'clock, which is not far away, Some of us who are actually working with PeeringDB will be in M10 for discussions about data ownership and a few other things, so I'll invite you to come along then as well. And one thing that no one seems to discuss today is the whole idea of APIs. Now this is fascinating. We've actually got AMSIX and links here at the conference. We've also got representatives on DKIX as well. But this is the new thing. Having an API available so that you can orchestrate your peering automatically is a huge value add. I was talking to the APICS the other day. One thing that we really like the idea of is automating letters of authority. So you can get your PDF saying you can cross-connect to us, sent to you by a robot instead of us having to sit down and do up a Word document and send it to you. But here's our mantra: automate all the things. So automation will save time. And of course, borrowing from the Tom Paseka playbook, a PSA, sign your routes. It's really, it's 2020, guys. Let's get everyone who's on our exchange points, get them doing the ROV so we can actually start implementing ROV. It's great for exchange points to say, yes, we are going to filter, but it would be nice if we had lots and lots of things to filter. Having a not signed on routes doesn't really help. It's good to either have yes, signed, valid, good, or invalid, throw it away. So, questions?
Thank you. Any questions? So, thank you, Terry, for giving us this presentation. And next up, we have our peering personals. If we can get those slides up. We have Aussie Broadband, we have Hurricane Electric, we have IPTP, we have NAP Africa, and we have Cloudflare. I'll take that off your hand. Aussie Broadband.
Okay, first one I've done on this. Aussie Broadband is 4764. We're in all the capital cities of Australia, so we want to get to, apart from Darwin and Hobart, but we want to get to those. Everywhere else, Megaport, Edge IX, IX Australia, Equinix. Also in Singapore at Equinix and Megaport, and the US in Los Angeles at Megaport NE2, and San Jose at Megaport and NE2 there. And we'll connect to anybody that wants to connect to us. We're open. And about 400 gig worth of inbound traffic. It's all eyeballs. And places to see. Oh, we've got some pictures here, but I'm from Gippsland, which is a couple hours east of Melbourne. It's the best place in Australia. Don't worry about anybody else. With beaches and the hills and so on. It's, yeah, a great place to visit if you want to come to Australia and have a look. Thank you.
Next up, Hurricane Electric.
Hi, I'm Walt from Hurricane Electric, 6939. We have an open peering policy, and we're at over 225 exchanges globally. Fremont, California, not a lot of people know where it is. It's just east of San Jose and Palo Alto. We have two data centers. The first one was the birthplace of the next. That's our data center 1. It's 45,000 square feet of co-location. The coolest one is our Mac 2 factory, or the Mac factory. And we have about 100,000 feet free. And the offer to the room is you bring in your network, I'll give you 1 free rack and power forever. Anyway, a little bit about Fremont is it's the birthplace of the movies, and Charlie Chaplin started filming there back in the day, and it was silent films way before Hollywood. So something cool about Fremont.
Thank you very much. Didn't know that about Fremont. IPTP.
IPTP just recently joined Australia and we deployed the POP in Global Switch, and we would be happy to expand peering in the region. Also, whoever not peering with us and matching our peering policy, we would be happy to expand. So what the second slide, unfortunately, not about the specifics of the some country, because we're everywhere. So please, it's just a little bit of specific where present. And if any interest, including the NIC.br, what had given the presentations or other locations, we would be happy to assist with expansion from Australia. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, next time you can tell us where you come from. It's okay. It doesn't have to be your company. NAP Africa?
Mark from NAP Africa. So AS37195, Internet Exchange Point in South Africa in all 3 data centers, Terraco. Peaked at 980 last week. Root service available openly. Terraco, DDC, Joburg, Cape Town and Durban. PNDB number there. Yes, something about South Africa. Brightflace, meat, something we're lacking at the moment here, speaking about people last night. And then some places you see, obviously, Table Mountain, all the national parks, and being called the Rainbow Nation due to all the official languages. Thank you.
And last but not least, Cloudflare.
That last picture made me hungry for some braai. I'm Tom from Cloudflare. We are appearing globally. We are at a very large number of internet exchanges. I think it's a little bit more than Walt, but about equal. We have a friendly competition going there. Yeah, I do. I just pulled out from PeeringDB the list of IXs in the region where we are. So this is all of the ones in Oceania where we are connected. And next slide. This is my hometown. I'm from Canberra. Very often you'll have sheep or cows grazing on the lawns of Parliament House. It's the capital of Australia. It really isn't interesting, but there are some things to see there. And IX Australia just recently launched, so we actually have peering in Canberra. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that cow have a name, friend of yours? Daisy. Daisy? All right. That concludes the end of the peering personal session. I believe my colleague over there in the red jacket has tickets to the peering social tonight. No? You look very confused. All right, no, she has some. So please attack her kindly. And if you have more, if you would like to introduce your network in the second session, the peering, we'll have another session of the peering personals after the second session as well. So I believe Toyama-san has something to say.
And also, the IXP